In this tutorial, we'll have a look at how to edit the motion path of a layer. So for that, I'm going to go and import some assets first. So I'll just go and double click in the project panel. And then in here, I'll go to my motion paths file and I'll import this. It's an Illustrator file. I'll import this as composition retaining the layer sizes. I'm going to press open. And then I'll open up my composition. So this is what we have. And in order to make things a little easier to see, I'm going to change my background color from black to white. So that's done, if you remember, by pressing Command K on the keyboard. That's going to bring up the composition settings. And I'll change my background color from black to white. I'll hit OK and OK here. And then for now, I'm not going to be using the path in the background. I'm just going to use that as reference. So I'll just go and lock that. And in fact, I'll shy it as well, so it doesn't appear in the timeline either. And once I turn the shy switch on, I just need to go and turn this on for the whole composition here as well. And I'll do the same for the arrow on the right. So I have two arrows, and initially I'll animate the arrow on the left. And once I'm done with that, I'll animate the one on the right. But until then, I'll just go and lock the arrow on the right. That's the arrow PNG, the purple and green. I'm going to lock that and I'll shy that as well. So it's visible, but we can't really click on it or do anything with it. So the only thing I can see in the timeline now is the red and yellow arrow. What I want to do now is to animate the position of this arrow to go from left to right. And as it does that, of course, it's going to need to follow the path. So it will curve here, and then it will follow another curve, and then another one. Then eventually it will leave the path. And for that, we need to animate the position. So let's go and press P on the keyboard. That's going to reveal position. And making sure I'm at the beginning of the timeline, I'm going to select the arrow and then click and drag this off screen somewhere here. And I'll actually keep the arrow on the left lane. So I'm just going to move it here. And I'm just going to go and keyframe this. And I'll go forward by 1 second. So I'll just jump here to 1 second. And then I'll move the arrow from here up to here. And by default, you'll see that the layer follows a straight line. This line here that we are seeing is called the motion path. Now, if you hit the third keyframe and the arrow goes to somewhere else on the third keyframe, like here, you're going to automatically curve this path. So let's have a look. Let's go to 2 seconds. And then I'm going to click on the arrow and then drag it down. And you see right away, the path is now being curved. It's not a perfect match. We'll make that look better in a second. But let's continue to the 3rd second here. And then I'll click on the arrow again. And then maybe move it up here and off screen above the lane there. Great, now we have an animation. If I go and play this back, if I just rewind and then hit spacebar to play it back, this is what we have. So it's following the path I just created, but not this blue path here perfectly. So let's go and see how you can make that perfect. Firstly, if you can't see this path clearly because of the color, you can simply go and change the color of the label. If I just go here and maybe make this a brown color or orange maybe, that's going to stand out a little more. And there we can now see the path clearly. These squares that you're seeing here are the actual keyframes. In fact, if I go and click on one of these, you'll see that the keyframe here gets selected. That's the 3rd keyframe. This is the 1st one. This is the 2nd one and so on. And the individual dots that you're seeing here are the actual frames. So if you were to actually count these dots, you'd work out how many frames there are in between the 2 keyframes. So if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and so on, eventually you would end up with 25 frames. That's the duration between the 2 keyframes, 25. And as well as seeing these tiny dots and the squares, you may also be seeing these slightly larger dots here. These dots are called the Bezier handles. Now the Bezier handles are there to control the actual curvature of the path. Now, if you can't see them, or in fact if you can't see the motion path at all, first make sure that the layer is selected. You see if I deselect the layer just by clicking somewhere empty here, the motion path disappears. And if I just go and select the layer again, the motion path reveals itself. And if you want to see those little handles to control the curvature of the path, you need to click on a keyframe. For example, if I want to control the curvature here, I would need to go and click on this keyframe, and that will reveal the 2 handles on either side of the keyframe. Now, in order to control the curvature, all you would need to do would be to click on these dots and then drag them. And you see as I drag this one on the left up and down, the opposite one, the one on the right, also drags up and down in the opposite direction. So as I go down with this, the one on the right goes up. And as I lift this up, the one on the right goes down. So the 2 are linked to each other, and that's for good reason. That's to keep this curve as smooth as possible, so you don't have any bumps on there. But sometimes you want to break that curve manually, and you do that by holding down on the keyboard the Alt key, then clicking on these, and you see when I hold down the Alt key, the 2 are not linked to each other anymore. So that's how you break the link between the 2 points. I'm going to undo that by pressing Command Z, so they're linked again. I'm going to go and try to create a curve that matches the curve of the path. So I'm going to click on this, and then drag this, making sure all the while that this line stays above the path, so it's on the left side of the path, so it's on the left lane per se. So I'm going to go click on this as well. This is the one for the 1st keyframe. I'll just drag this one towards right, And perhaps I can drag this one further left. And I'm just going to keep doing this until the curve lines up pretty much perfectly. So I'll just keep doing this here, and then maybe bring this down a little bit like that. And I think that's done the trick now. So this is following that path pretty much perfectly. And I'll continue doing this on the right hand side, and I'll just go all the way around. So I'm going to click on this and then drag this right, like that. And then I'm going to click on this keyframe to reveal its handles. I'm just going to click and drag this around. And again, I'll just keep dragging this until the lines line up perfectly. Just do the same here. And maybe drag this down a little bit. Now you can see as I drag this up and down, it's affecting this part of the line as well. Now in this case, I actually don't want that to happen. So I'm going to hold down Alt to break the link between the two. I can then edit that manually, like that. And then with Alt again, I'm going to click and drag this around. And that's looking fine. I'll then click on this keyframe to reveal the handle on the right. These are actually called vertices, or a vertex if you're talking about a single one, or plural form is vertices. I'll just click on this vertex and maybe drag this around. And notice, once I break the link between the two handles by holding down Alt and dragging one of them, the link is already broken, which means I don't need to hold down Alt anymore. So I can just click on this without the Alt key, because the link is already broken. It's affecting just this side of the line. Now, if I want to relink them, I would hold down the Alt key, and that's how you re-establish the link between the 2 points. So I'm going to press Command Z now. I'll just go and create a curve here as well, and finally, I'll curve this one as well. I'll just go click and drag this here, and maybe this one further right, and then this one up and left a little more, and then this one further right, like that. And maybe to create a slightly tighter fit here, I'm just going to go click and drag, like that. Perfect. Now if you go and play this, if I go back to the beginning, you'll see that the arrow always stays on the left side of the path, so it's on the left lane. If I play it now, you'll see. That's great. If I pause it and go back to the beginning. Of course, you can make further tweaks to this as you like. You can click on these vertices and drag them around, or you can click on the handles and just tweak them as well. And I want to show you one more thing here. We won't actually be using it for this exercise, but you should know this. If you want the line to be a straight line, so if you want this motion path to be a straight path rather than a curvy path, you can convert this path into a straight one by using the tool called the Convert Vertex tool. And it's up here. Usually, you'll have the pen tool here, so if you click and hold it down, you'll see the pen tool. This is the one that's selected by default. Instead, if you click and hold it down and then select the Convert Vertex tool, with that selected, if you just move your cursor onto a vertex and then click on the other ones, you'll see by simply clicking on the point, you're making the path straight. I can do the same for here, and then eventually here, and now we got rid of those curves, and it's now following a straight path, a diagonal path. If I just go and play it again, you see there's no curve. If you want to reintroduce the curves, all you have to do is either click and let go, that's going to curve it, and same here as well. Or if you want to introduce the curve and edit it at the same time, you can just click and drag rather than just clicking. So we don't click and let go. So up here again, let me show you. You don't just click and let go. You click and drag to create the curve on the fly. I'm going to press Command Z a couple of times until the curve we had comes back. It's here. And I'll go back to the beginning and just check that this is working, and in fact, it is. If you wanted to edit this path further, you could actually use the same tool here, the Convert Vertex tool, or in fact you can use your pen tool. We'll talk about the pen tool in more detail when we talk about masking. If you get the pen tool, if you move your cursor with the pen tool anywhere on this path, you see you'll have a little plus sign next to the cursor. That means you can now click and add a new vertex. It's going to be called a vertex here. And down here in the timeline, you've just created a keyframe. Because remember, all these vertices relate to a keyframe. So if I go and click here, that's going to create a vertex on the path, and that in return is going to create a keyframe on my timeline. I can do the same here as well. If I just go click here, I can then move this around. So if I get my selection tool, I can move these points like I did earlier. And this is changing the position of the vertex or the keyframe. So I can just click and drag this. Having more keyframes will of course give you more control, but it might make things a little more fiddly. So keep an eye on that. And you want to create just as many keyframes as you need, no more. I'm just going to click and drag these around. And by adding more keyframes, you can control your path much more precisely. If you want to delete these points, all you would need to do would be to select them and then press delete on the keyboard. And then you would need to go and readjust the curve. Or you can delete a keyframe here, and when you delete one, you're also going to delete the vertex here. So if I, for example, go and select this one, and then delete, you see that this one will disappear. So I'm going to go back again by pressing Command Z. When we play this back, you see that the arrow is moving from left to right, but it isn't pointing in the right direction all the time. So for example, as the arrow goes from here to here, we would expect it to point up and towards right a little bit, and as it's coming down from that curve, we would expect it to point down and right. Now one way of doing that, a long way of doing that, would be to animate the rotation. So if I go press Shift R to reveal rotation as well, I can animate the rotation and keyframe this. So it looks down here, then I can keyframe this, then go forward, and at this point it looks further down, and then go forward again, and at this point it looks further down, and then go forward, and then at this point I would need to change the direction. And this is a tedious way of doing it. Instead, there's an automated way. Let me go and reset this back to 0. The automated way is called Auto Orient. You can tell a layer to automatically face the direction of travel, and that's done by using Auto Orient. And you get to Auto Orient by selecting the layer and then right-clicking on it either here, or you can right-click on the layer here, or you can right-click on the layer here in the composition panel, or in fact, you can go to the layer menu at the top. You'll get the same menu options in all cases. And then you come down to Transform, and right at the bottom of this list is Auto Orient. The shortcut is Command, Alt, and O. If I now go and click on this, it gives us two options here, Off, which is the default one, or Orient Along Path. So if I turn this option on where it says Orient Along Path, and if I hit OK, you'll see now that the arrow, as it travels, will rotate as well. So if I now go back, you see that the orientation updates as the arrow goes from left to right. So it points up here, then at this point it points down, and it goes back up again, and so on. So this means we don't have to keyframe the rotation at all. We can just simply tell it to face the direction of travel. And this is great, because if I now go and update the motion path for whatever reason, for example, if I click on this keyframe and then drag this around, you'll see the orientation of the arrow will change. So if I now change this, and if I let go, you see as the arrow goes through there, it's going to change its orientation again. So this effect remains on the layer, almost like a live effect, which means every time you update the motion path, it's going to update the orientation of the layer.